Alaina,
Hi.
how exciting is it that you and I actually get to formally have this conversation? Because obviously you and I have worked together for years, and I've described to so many people what an environmental analysis is, but at the end of the day, you have created this baby and it has been a model that you've perfected over time. So I just thought I want to just have a conversation directly with Alaina and have her walk through what exactly an environmental analysis is and what are the elements in it and then what happens once it gets done. So I know that you're busy, and thank you so much for spending some time with the boss today.
Yes, of course. I'm excited to talk about this.
So I think let's talk big picture first. What in the world is an environmental analysis, and why do you think that this is even something important for a college?
Well, I would start out by saying that an environmental analysis is like putting your entire student experience under a microscope. So you're not just looking at numbers, it's about seeing the entire ecosystem. So the data, the processes, the people, the communication, and the unspoken student perceptions that really shape your outcomes at your institutions. So
Right.
colleges typically invest in this because it helps them move decisions from what we think is happening on the ground to what we know is happening. I always like to describe when our clients ask us about an environmental analysis, I think of it as a doctor's appointment. So, say you are having headaches very often and you call your doctor's office and you say, I'm having headaches. I want to get some medication so that I can get relief. Your doctor, if they're a good doctor, will not just send in a prescription for a migraine medication, but they'll ask you to come into the office and do blood tests, maybe an MRI, maybe allergy tests, a variety of diagnostic tests in order to get to the root of your symptoms to be able to prescribe you something that will actually work. So, our environmental analysis really has the same goal. Say an institution is experiencing enrollment declines or retention challenges. This is really the base symptom of what is really going on, but often it's a much deeper problem. And so, our environmental analysis really allows us to figure out what the root of the problem is.
Okay. Well, one of the things that is the first step in all of our environmental analysis work is this data review process. And I know it's something that is really important. I know it's the most frustrating for clients because some of the institutions have the data readily available. Some of them, it takes them a little bit of time depending on the infrastructure with where those data points live. Um, but I like to hear from you to put into context why this foundational element is so important before we look or talk to anybody else. Why is that data review so important in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had just said that the data is not the only thing. And so I sound like I am going back on what I just said. But really, what the data does for us is give us a starting point. And often the data tells us a lot. And what this experience also tells us about is what kind of data institutions don't have, which is just as important as what they do have. So, a lot of the times, if we're seeing numbers that look a little bit concerning, it gives us areas to dig in deeper with the rest of our research activities. But it also gives us an idea of how are you storing your data? How are you reporting this out? How are you tracking successes at your institution? And all of these things are really important context as we go into the rest of our very deep research activities to give us that really top down idea of what's happening at the institution.
Right. And to your point, you talked about how the data review is not the only component, which is absolutely true. And I agree. I think what's really important from a change management perspective. So when institutions decide to move forward into that next phase of work, the trust has to be established with the actual day to day people, those boots on the ground people. And I think that we do that through something we call deep dives, right? But what's important before we get to those deep dives is that you've had a chance to look at that data so that you and your team don't walk in there and just say, oh, tell me what you do every day. It's really a conversation where you're giving them information in context. So can you give me a little bit of insight on what does it mean when you say, well, we come and do deep dives? What does that look like?
So, a deep dive is really a structured, in depth conversation with people who live in the student experience every day. So, that can be faculty, advisors, financial aid staff, enrollment teams, and leadership. But something that you just said that's really important is that we're not walking in and just saying, tell me what you do every day. We're really digging into what teams do we need to talk to, because a lot of the times teams are structured very differently at different institutions, and we don't wanna say, "Let me talk to your enrollment team," if there are other really important members that are outside of what's classified as the enrollment team that we think we're getting in the room when we're really not. So, that initial groundwork to make sure we're talking to the right people and asking the right questions is really where the data is informing these conversations. But as we go through these conversations, being able to have conversations with the people that are boots on the ground, that are seeing the students every day, that can voice the student concern and talk about processes, hidden bottlenecks, and even internal successes that may not be visible from the data is really important in getting the full scale picture.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned that's really important is the change management aspect of it all. So a lot of the times when we're talking with these teams, we do not include their direct reports or their bosses in that room. So we want them to feel comfortable talking about those bottlenecks. That can feel very vulnerable to talk about ways that things aren't working. But for us to really get the full picture of what's going on, we need to be able to have those down to earth conversations with the people that know the students the best.
I completely agree. And I think, okay, so now we have the data review or data review. We also have the deep dives, right? And this gives you enough information to be dangerous to start now having some. This is actually, I have to confess, I know that this is one of your favorite parts in the world when it comes to our surveys and our focus groups. So I think first I want you to walk through where do surveys fit and why is it so important for those to kick off following what you've learned from the deep dives.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we like to structure our research is starting with the quantitative data, with a larger data set. So that's why surveys are important to go first in all of these instances, so that if there is anything that we're seeing in survey data with a larger audience, that we can really dig in on the qualitative data with a focus group. So surveys let us gather broad input from staff, students, sometimes alumni, sometimes faculty, sometimes the greater community. And we design these to go above satisfaction scores. So we ask about things like clarity of processes, timing and accessibility, emotional response to the processes in place. And we want to not just know if the process worked, but how it felt for the student. And that's the really important piece that we can really dig into more with focus groups once we do identify some of those pain points from the larger data set.
So, before we get into what most of our institutions are first super, super excited about, I want to jump to the part that um, is, in addition to the data analysis, the part that is the most nerve wracking are our audits. So, our communications audits, our social media audits, our comp plan audits. Anytime someone hires us to do these portions, these one of these three things, immediately the look on the people who are frontline are like, oh gosh, this is happening. And we don't ever want to scare anybody, but walk us through just a high level of what are these audits and why do we do them?
Sure. So this is going to sound very intimidating, and I don't want it to sound intimidating because the result of this is really understanding how students are perceiving the institution and how we're communicating with them. So a lot of the time people have the student's best interest in mind when communicating with them, but if that's not something centralized, then they may be over communicating. They may be communicating different things from different departments to the same student. So we do end up collecting every email, text, letter, call script, post that a student might see at the institution. We then map it against the student journey. So a lot of what we were talking about in the beginning with deep dives, that will really show us what the process is for the student going through or what they think the process currently is. That's an important piece right there because
Like, yeah.
sometimes the process is perfect on paper, but in practice, that's not what's happening. And so these audits can really help us get an idea of what the students are actually being communicated, what they're actually seeing, what they've heard are their next steps, maybe that doesn't match the perfect process that has been designed in place.
Well, listen, this piece is probably the one that is the most fun because we are spies. And I think that I created the secret shopper slash now branded secret student experience probably about 10 years ago. And it was when I realized that there needed to be a triangulation between what cabinet believes is happening, what the processes state is happening, and then what is really happening when these students that you want to capture and touch are actually experiencing. Does it match what cabinet is saying? Does it match what who the cabinet's direct reports are saying? Does it match the processes? What does it look like? What does it feel like? So walk me through how you execute those, because a lot has changed over the past 10 years and you've really evolved this into not just a here's what we're just going to go act like we're a whole bunch of people. It's more of a scientific approach to how you capture this information. So I don't want to steal it all and talk about it like it's my baby. Can you just talk a little bit about secret students?
Yes. So secret students are a really important research tool for us. Just like you said, it really will identify places where the process is not working. It will identify bottlenecks that are not typically seen. So if we have students that are just stopping out and are not talking to us ever again, and we don't know why they left, then we're never going to know what we did wrong or how we can improve. So that's where our secret students come in, and a lot of the groundwork that we've already talked about. So the data review, the deep dives, also the focus groups and the surveys. We've already identified some pain points that we want to dig into a little bit more. And that's how we craft our secret student personas. So, using the data from the institution, so the demographics of the students, as well as the most popular majors, and also the students that they see that are having challenges in navigating their processes, are going to be the personas that we craft. We then send trained secret students, so secret students who match your institutional profile, but are admissions professionals, they're financial aid professionals. They understand how the process should look, but they are behaving as a prospective student. What they do is they go through the entire admissions process, documenting each step of their journey. So you will get a very in-depth view of what it looks like as a student. That's going to be screenshots. That's going to be transcripts of phone calls. So you'll see from the point that they Google the institution and say nursing programs near me until the point that they are ready to register for classes is going to be something that you have on paper that you can review against what the process should be.
That's right. Thank you for that. And I think it's important to say that, we are not a company that likes to do the gotcha, right? So, what Alaina and your team, what I really respect about what the process is that you've built with the environmental analysis work is that there's no surprise at the end. Whoever that contract owner is will have received updates and documentation for every single step along the way. And am I right with that?
Definitely, and also clarifications. So if we see something that feels off or that we wanna dig into more, we bring that by the person that is representing the institution, and they can either give us information on why that process is behaving that way or say, "We actively have a task force that is working on a solution for this problem," or, "We had no idea that this was a problem, let's dig in more." So we do have those conversations to make sure that we are focusing our efforts in the right place.
Right. And I think that that's really important because our goal is never to surprise and pull a got you, like I said before. And it's important that if it's a task force that's already established, then we're able to say, well, can you give me the charter so that we can make sure that these are the things that are being addressed and covered so that when we provide the recommendations, the findings and recommendations, we're providing it, letting cabinet know these are already being addressed. We would recommend to shift this way or to change this way. So I just talked a little bit about the findings and recommendations, but can you share with us how do you bring it all together? Now you have all these things, all of these different reports now. How do you bring it all together?
Yeah, absolutely. So internally, we are always having a running list that we are thinking of solutions or thinking of themes of problems. And then we're bringing those all together into a synthesized findings and recommendations report. So that's going to be all of the research activities together brought into one findings and recommendations. It is a clear picture of what's working and what's not, supported by multiple research methods. So if we're finding one process that isn't working, we're going to include what we found during the deep dives and what we found during the secret student experience. So this gives us a clear picture of what can be improved and also what's already working really well, because that's an important piece of this as well, to really celebrate the successes and continue to improve upon what needs to be improved upon. With every recommendation, we are prioritizing where that needs to go within the institutional strategy so that the institution knows where to start for maximum impact. So, if we hand a large document over to an institution, that might feel very overwhelming. And so, we want to make sure that it is a clear roadmap for that institution to tackle these large problems and be able to improve their student experience.
Yeah, so we prioritize them, we put them in a timeline for you so that then you have something to at least respond to once you receive the recommendations. And I think that although those deliverables are extremely important to the client, to me, going back to your original patient going to the doctor for the headache, the findings and recommendations is really telling you here are all the reasons that you have this headache, and here's how we can avoid that or mitigate that or support you through healing down the line. So I do think that that is the singular thing that really sets your team apart with how you handle our environmental analysis work is that you do take the time to prioritize that work for the client. I know that you and your team are normally behind the scenes doing all of this work. So I do want to thank you for being in the front of the scene today and allowing me to share with the world exactly how unbelievably well organized and structured our environmental analysis are, thanks to you and your team. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me.
Okay.